Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest today is JT Chapman. He is the creator of Second Thought. JT, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So I have seen a lot of your videos. It's really interesting. I think a lot of people assume that those of us that do news, that we only watch like YouTubers that also do the news. But no, I watch a lot of video essays. And I'm a big fangirl here. So just FYI, because I've seen a lot of your stuff. But I'm really curious, like what made you decide to, number one, become a YouTube creator? And number two, focus on this style of video essays?
Sure. When I graduated college, my degree is in journalism and mass communication. And I did some internships there. I was like, okay, this is really gross. So I don't want to do this at all. Ended up working at Best Buy for a couple of years, did a short stint of like 2 months in software sales. And a buddy of mine had started a YouTube channel and he'd found some success. I'm like, well, I'm a better editor than he is. Maybe I'll give it a shot. And so I started a channel, and 8 months later made a video called What If NASA Had the US Military Budget? That blew up, and that was about it. The rest is history. I figured it could be sustainable. I went full time with YouTube shortly after that. And then come the pandemic, 2020, I had been reading about socialism. Like I had followed Bernie's campaigns and stuff, and I'd, gone down the rabbit hole of, oh, Bernie's not actually a socialist. He's a social democrat. Okay, what's the difference between, and then, the same story that most Americans have. And I was just so frustrated with, having a big platform, not really enjoying what I was doing, and understanding more about capitalism than I had before, like back when I started my channel. So I said, okay, I'm going to make one video about socialism, talk about the pandemic, and if it tanks my channel, fine, I'll go back to work at Best Buy. I felt really compelled to do something. So I made that video, Capitalism and the U.S. Pandemic Response, and the reception was really good. And so I said, okay, well, I enjoy doing this. The audience seems to like it, so I guess I'll keep doing these video essays about socialism now.
Awesome. It's interesting. We have a similar background. I also majored in broadcast journalism in undergrad too, along with English. And just like you, I had not a good experience in an internship at a local TV station. And I was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be at all. So I totally understand. We have that familiar background. I'm curious too, in reference to the video essay format, because there are a number of people that create video essays on YouTube. Some of them have started off in different paths. For example, now beheaded Jehovah, she started off making hair videos, natural hair videos, and then she started to pivot during the Bernie's campaign and started to focus more on democratic socialism. And so she was doing video essays about that as well. Typically for you, how long would you say it takes to create one video essay? Because I don't think people realize the amount of time that goes into editing.
Yeah, it's something that I've got a small team. There are 3 of us. And it's something that I've kind of worked out the kinks on over the last 8 years. When I started, I was doing like 2 or 3 videos a week, and they were bad. I mean, like they were not very good. But that's what I felt like I needed to do to get noticed by the algorithm, and for better or for worse, that it kind of seemed to work that way. And then I switched, once I had a foothold in the YouTube video essay space, I switched to 1 a week, and that was taking up pretty much all my time doing it myself. And then when I started working with a small team, then we were able to slow down a little bit, take our time, produce stuff that was really special, in my opinion. And we take 2 weeks to do each of our episodes now. So we'll shoot on a Monday. I'll deliver the audio, the color corrected video to whoever's going to be editing it that week. They'll cut for like a week. We go back and forth on what kind of visual assets we want to include, stuff like that, the design elements of it all, which we really stress because I think it's super important to get normal people engaged. Has to look good. And then we just kind of fine tune for a week and make the thumbnail, all that stuff. So it's about seven days of actual cutting, I would say. And then the other week is spent on all the peripheral stuff, writing, editing, thumbnail, stuff like that.
So you've been doing this for, I think about like 8 years.
Yeah, I started in, I'm not going to do that math, 2016, something like that, 8 years ago. Yeah, almost exactly 8 years.
How would you say the algorithm has changed since then? Because those of us that started, particularly those of us that do live streams, the news live streams, those of us that started after Joe Biden won in 2020, we really, really had to struggle with
Mhm.
the algorithm.
Absolutely, yeah. I think my channel was I got in right at the last moment. It seems like, because you'll have the big channels that were in my niche, the education niche, before I switched to socialist content, like Real Life Lore, Wendover Productions, Real Engineering, stuff like that. Our channels all kind of blew up around the same time, give or take 8 months, something like that. And they all kind of followed the same trajectory. They had a video that did really well, they got catapulted, and that momentum kind of carried them. It was a little bit easier for that to happen back then, I would say. I haven't seen that happen with many new channels within the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. And that's disheartening for a lot of people who are starting out, especially in the radical politics space, because it's already so hard to carve out a niche and get people interested in your content. And if it's being suppressed, not to put on a tinfoil hat or anything, but the United States has a track record of trying to suppress this kind of information. That makes it extra hard. So to have the algorithm fighting against you as well, that's an uphill battle.
Right. Most of the videos about Israel or
Mhm.
Gaza, even some of the videos I have about Ukraine, those are either demonetized or they're limited monetization. So they have the yellow, like the
Yep.
yellow dollar sign. Like they really don't. Basically, for YouTube, I think a lot of people may not realize, but they're basically looking to see, is it advertiser friendly?
Mhm.
If they don't feel it's advertiser friendly, then they're just like, no, we're not going to monetize that video. I saw
Mhm.
recently you actually had a video about really prominent YouTubers actually that have announced that they're leaving YouTube or they're quitting the current show that they have on
Mhm.
YouTube. What do you think is really pushing that trend?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to they've been doing it for a long time and it's time to do something else. Like a lot of these people, they're pushing 40, 45, some of them even older. They started out, YouTube was a fun side project kind of thing. Like Tom Scott, especially, like he's getting older, uh, and he's had tremendous success. A lot of those big channels, they don't need YouTube, their main channels at least, to pay the bills. They can go and do fun projects that they have on the side. I think that's a big part of it. For smaller channels, they deal with the same issues that large channels do, with changes to the algorithm and things like that, but they don't have the benefit of, the tremendous clout that comes with having a large channel. So they have to throw in the towel for the same reasons, and, tough luck. Part of it, I think, is just the frivolous changes to the algorithm that aren't made explicit, what they are, how they function, what best practices are to get your videos noticed, things like that. If you've spent your entire YouTube career following one set of advice that you've heard from creators and then everything changes and suddenly your videos tank, you don't have much recourse. There's no one really to reach out to at YouTube.
This is true. I've seen a number of people come and go. I mean, I've
Mhm.
only been doing this. This is like my third year, I believe. But I've seen a number of people come and go because
Yeah.
they, had a lot of battles with the algorithm or they were tired of, YouTube either demonetizing their videos or they just felt like it wasn't really taking off as quickly as they wanted it to. And
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of people just kind of throw in the towel then.
Yeah, and alienation's a big part of it too. I mean, you put yourself out there to millions of people if you've got a large channel, or thousands of people if you have a moderately sized channel, and people seem to think that it's this very social thing because you get thousands of views, thousands of comments, but not really. At the end of the day, I'm sitting alone in this office. It's me and my laptop, and I'm just putting myself out there to be crucified by whoever decides to watch my content, and so that can really wear on you. And I think that's something that a lot of people won't necessarily notice explicitly if they're not, if they don't have class consciousness of any sort. But that, they'll just call it generic burnout or something like that. but it's a real problem. This anything to do with working online, especially lonely content creation like YouTube, it's alienating.
Yes, and I've also noticed too the TikTok, well, maybe not so much TikTok, but Twitch, the
Mm.
Twitch streamers. It was brought to my attention that these people are streaming like 9, 10
Mhm.
hours every day. Like that's insane. And I always advise people like it's good to take breaks. I don't think anyone should live stream every day. I don't live
Mhm.
stream every day. Like it's just, I think it can be very draining if you're
Yeah.
just sitting there and you're just live streaming the whole time instead of like actually having those interactions with people in person. And then the other thing is too, like when you're doing this, I'm pretty sure, I don't know where you live, but I'm pretty sure there may be times where you go out and you get recognized.
Mm.
So you have to deal with that too. Like for me, it usually doesn't happen so much in Boston. But I mean, a lot of people that are volunteers here that are part of like the mutual aid group that I work with, they already know, they know who I am or whatever, but they're not like that. But whenever I go to DC to cover a rally or a protest there, I always run into people that like recognize me. And I'm like, oh no, that's not a part of it too.
Yeah, I live in Texas, so luckily there aren't a ton of people here who watch socialist content, so I don't get recognized all that often. But if I'm on a college campus or something to speak for a DSA, there will be people who recognize, which is cool. But yeah, it is kind of weird. Like I don't know any of these people. Having people know me, whom I don't know in return, it's a little odd sometimes.
I agree. Now, I know that you said you looked into whether or not Bernie Sanders was actual
Mhm.
socialist. I actually did that too, like during that time, because I was
Yeah.
like, I'm hearing from people this is an actual socialism. What do you think has happened to Bernie Sanders and members of the squad?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to the fact this I think is a fairly well historically established fact that you cannot change a system like capitalism from the inside by working within the confines of the system. It just doesn't work like that. Eventually you will be consumed by the machine that you're fighting against, even if you have the best intentions. Like Bernie was genuinely a good radical guy in his youth. We've all seen the picture of him getting arrested, right? That's cool, good for him. But like the way he's kind of toned it down since his campaigns, trotted dutifully alongside Biden, uh, condemned the Palestinian resistance in some cases, and offered lukewarm rebukes of the Israeli apartheid regime. That's tremendously disheartening, and I think that's been pretty eye-opening for a lot of people, especially people who followed Bernie's campaign, thinking that he was a socialist, a proper socialist. You're like, okay, now I see how this social democracy thing works. When push comes to shove, they're going to side with the status quo against socialism, against emancipatory movements.
That's right. And you see that happening more so, I think, with AOC the most out of all
Yeah,
the squad
absolutely.
members.
Mm-hmm.
People are very angry, very
Yeah.
angry at AOC, and you notice like they're very touchy now. Like you can't
Mm-hmm.
critique them, you can't approach them. They're very standoffish towards the very people that either donated to their campaigns or supported them heavily. It's like they have, like you said, they have become a part of the machine, and now they're there. And I look back at Justice Democrats, and sometimes I wonder, why didn't Justice Democrats try to make sure they maintain that communication with the squad members after they were elected? Because it seems like when I look at Force the Vote, it just seems like they did not have proper direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's disheartening to see when some young progressive gets elected and you're like, yes, finally, someone with radical credentials. They worked with whomever, CPUSA, DSA, PSL, whatever, and then give them 4 years, and re-election comes around or something like that, and they got a fundraise. It becomes optics, quote unquote, pragmatism, stuff like that, and then it's gone. That radicality is just washed out of them. And in some cases, you're like, well, you can't help but feel bad for them for, bless their hearts, they thought they could do something from the inside. But also, if you abandon your principles like that for the sake of what? Getting reelected, feeling important, donations to your campaign, I don't know. You become part of the machinery of the state that is the enemy of working class people.
Right. I can see that. And that leads us to what we have now, which is people are really, or I feel like some progressives are trying to argue for the need to drag Joe Biden across the finish line. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's very appalling. And there's the Trump derangement syndrome. And they're telling everybody, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, then we will get Donald Trump. But there are a number of third party and independent candidates that are running this time around that do have strong name recognition, I would say. And I know people choosing different ones here and there, but it's really frustrating to see that even squad members will not even endorse or support or encourage whatever supporters they have left to back the candidates that are against the genocide in Gaza, to back
Yeah.
the candidates that actually have policies more aligned with their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it always comes down to, again, the pragmatism thing. They say, oh, you know what, you're just going to split the vote. And as bad as Biden is, you just got to hold your nose and vote for him. It's like, no, you really don't. I promise you, you do not. Like, it's the way, at least when I was growing up in school, and the way it was taught to us was, you know, it's your civic duty to vote, but the politician has to earn your vote. Make sure you vote for the person who's done enough to earn your vote. Biden has not done that. In fact, he has done everything in his power to make sure I don't vote for him, you know, with the genocide, with continuing Trump's awful policies, with the TikTok thing now and the posturing against China. It's like, how are you going to call yourself the lesser evil when you are committing this much evil? You know, to me, there's no justification for voting for Joe Biden, just as there isn't for voting for Trump.
Right. And that leads me to this video that you created recently. It's getting a lot of buzz. It's called The Most Dangerous Thing in the Western Hemisphere. I've seen a number of people share this, and I want to go to this particular timestamp here when you're talking about MLK and how to protest, because this brought back memories for me, and it makes me think about how liberals in particular can be.
The thing that always concretizes that fact for me is this comic by the white moderate cartoonist Charles Brooks. King talking to a reporter with the city destroyed in the background and some white people lying on the ground, and King saying, "I plan to lead another non-violent march tomorrow." This is exactly what we see today. Liberals get uncomfortable and suddenly they're not for equal rights anymore. Or more accurately, they still say they are, but they just have some concerns about optics. That's not how you're supposed to protest. Why can't everyone just protest peacefully? Why? So you can ignore it? The entire point of protest is to be disruptive.
This point right here, I think the whole video is really great, but this particular piece right here, it really was moving to me, because as an activist, I've seen this time and time again. Every time we try to organize something, there's criticism in reference to how we decided to protest, when we decided to do it. It's not the right time. It's not the right day. It's not the right method. And it's usually, a lot of times, it is coming from liberals. And I'm just like, what is the deal? You know, we look back at people like MLK, and a lot of liberals praise the way that MLK chose to protest, you know, in a nonviolent way. But at that point in time, the civil rights movement wasn't even popular in this country. So even Dr. King was getting criticism. And I want to hear your take about that in reference to organizing and activism in this country. The need for liberals to, it's almost like the lesser two evils again, right? Where liberals, they say they agree with those issues, particularly when it comes to social justice, but they're usually the main ones to criticize the way we're doing it. Whereas I feel like people on the right will criticize the action overall, like, why are you doing it? But I feel like liberals will approve of the action, but they'll critique and criticize the fact that you did it in the way that you did.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Malcolm X with his fox and wolf analogy. You know, you see the wolf, you know what he's up to. That's the right wingers, and then with the liberals, it's the fox. You know, you see his teeth, but he presents himself in such a way that you think that he's smiling, and that's very, very true to this day. The liberals will always say that they support you or your movement, but hey, maybe just tone it down a little bit. I mean, it's just bad optics. You're making yourself look bad, frankly. It's like, So what is the proper way to protest to these people? Well, the proper way to protest to them would be to do a legally organized protest that follows all the rules established by the system you're protesting against in such a way that everybody can ignore it, which defeats the whole purpose of protest, right? The whole idea is to be disruptive, to get people to look at what's going on and to grapple with it, to make things slightly inconvenient so that it's brought into the public consciousness in a way that can't be ignored. And it's like Dr. King said, right? They're always being admonished to wait for a more convenient season. And that's exactly what the liberals do. They're like, okay, well, not right now. Wait till Biden's in office. Wait till the next Democrat's in office, whatever. Then you can try to push them left. It's the same story as far back as you want to look.
Yeah, and you even see that with the pro-Palestinian protests. I saw that with the BLM protests, and with the pro-Palestinian protests, it's you're not using the right slogan. That was also said during the BLM protests. And I also found out recently there were actually disputes about this during the civil rights movement as well, in reference to, are we using the right slogan? It just seems like these are just things that are thrown in to distract people and to disrupt the actual action from happening in the first place.
Yeah. And a lot of that, is well-intentioned liberals who are like, well, I don't want to scare my grandma. Well, what if we use this kind of language instead? But then there's we've always had a problem with infiltration on the left. And there's this pamphlet that's going around every once in a while that shows the explicit steps that federal informants and moles were encouraged to take to slow things down, to throw a stick in the spokes. And that's one of them, is to debate over frivolous little things like, okay, what's the best slogan here? What about this particular word? I'm not sure. Before we move on to the next point in the agenda, let's talk about this some more, just to really grind things to a halt, quibble over minutia, stuff like that. And that is, it's bad to assume everybody's a Fed, but it's also important to recognize that in every organization, there are some people who only exist to make things more difficult, to make it nearly impossible for us to organize effectively.
I also have noticed, at least over the past couple years, a lot of these movements have been co-opted by the Democratic Party. I saw that with BLM. I even see that now with the pro-Palestinian protests, where we do have people like Kamala Harris calling for what the media said was a ceasefire. It actually wasn't. She was calling for a temporary pause, which Joe Biden had already called for. So this wasn't like a big thing, but they made it a big thing. I'm noticing now that term ceasefire has been co-opted by the Democratic Party, and they've watered it down like they've done before when they co-opt certain movements.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The clip with Kamala Harris, where she says that we want a ceasefire, specific, pause right there for a second, just so she knows that the media can get the clip of that and ignore the rest of the sentence, which is, for X amount of time, blah, 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 with all the stipulations attached. Okay, that's clever. Very sneaky. But yeah, it's the same thing with like defund the police. That was another one that was kind of co-opted. It was abolish the police, and then it became defund the police, and then, accountability, stuff like that. Same thing is happening with ceasefire, whether they're trying to do for a humanitarian pause or a brief ceasefire. And the Palestinian people have been adamant, no, we're not asking for a brief humanitarian pause so we can release hostages and then you can continue butchering us. We are demanding a permanent ceasefire and an end to the illegal occupation. And so the way we use language is very important. It's critical that we understand how the demands for a ceasefire coming out of Palestine are different from the offerings of a quote-unquote ceasefire peddled by policy wonks and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
That's correct. Do you think that this, in particular, Gaza, do you think it will have an effect on the 2024 presidential election for Joe Biden?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he's done. I think that was the nail in the coffin for him, because he was already quite unpopular. This has cemented it for an entire generation of young voters. They're like, no, we're not going to vote for this guy. Are you kidding me? If I had to guess today, I would think we're getting another Trump presidency, and that is terrible. That sucks. There are people who will be materially worse off because of that, because of just the way the Republican Party is. They are openly bigoted. They are openly transphobic, openly racist. The Democrats are a little bit more subtle about it. Trump has threatened to deport people. Whether he'll actually do it, I don't know. We'll see. But it's going to come down to the Democrats are going to blame the left again for another Trump presidency when it was entirely within their power to stop backing a 75-year genocide of an indigenous population. We didn't have to fund them. We did not have to fund Israel, send them weapons. We did not have to let them train our cops. Joe Biden could have stopped this at any moment. He still can, but he is actively choosing not to. So I absolutely think it's going to have an effect on the election.
It's really interesting too. I'm thinking about your state of Texas. I've been told by some people that Texas is now purple. I wanted to hear that from you. Do you think Texas is purple, and where would you say are the areas in Texas that potentially have been making that shift?
Yeah, it's Dallas and Austin, which are Dallas massive, the DFW Metroplex, so Dallas Fort Worth. Fun fact about Texas, Fort Worth, which is part of that Metroplex, is the largest city in the country that is still considered a red city. Normally over a certain size, cities flip to blue or leaning Democratic. Overall, just because of the population centers that were heavily concentrated in cities like Dallas, that is what is leading Texas to become a quote-unquote purple state. If you go out to the far suburbs and then into rural Texas, obviously it still skews quite red, but it's only a matter of time before Texas is a solidly purple state.
That is very interesting. I've always wondered too, like why people continue to vote for Ted Cruz. I don't understand.
Nobody likes Ted Cruz. Even the Republicans don't like Ted Cruz, but he's, I guess he's the devil, right? Versus some other person. I don't know. I don't think we're going to be free of Ted Cruz for a very long time.
Oh my God. How do you think people in Texas in particular, in reference to socialism, do you feel like more younger people in Texas, I'm assuming the college areas there, are willing to embrace socialism or at least hear about it?
Absolutely. Funnily enough, I wouldn't say that Texas is any more reactionary than most places in the United States. It has its differences. So if I were to go to Portland, I would say I would say Portland is more racist than Dallas. I've spent a lot of time in the South. I've lived all over the U.S. Alabama, while there are some racists, they're not sneaky. They'll be open about it, and you can ignore them. You can say you're a bad person. I'm not gonna tolerate this and move on. You go up north. I've lived in Connecticut. I lived in New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania. That's where the real insidious racism is hidden. And so in some ways, it's refreshing to be somewhere like Texas where people will just outright say their bigoted beliefs, and you can say, okay, let's unpack that a little bit, and you can work with them on it. Whereas elsewhere in the country that I've lived, people try to squirm out of being labeled a racist, and then it's very hard to have a discussion. So if people are frank with you, you can at least communicate a little bit more clearly. And they're not always going to change their mind. I'm not saying, it's better to have an out-and-out racist in front of you. No, racism is one of the great evils of our time. But I will say that Texas is not as reactionary as people think it is. And it's very heartening to see how many young people, particularly in the cities, but also in the suburbs, are open to hearing socialist ideas and changing their minds.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know. I live in Massachusetts, in the Boston area here, and yes, it is a different type. It is a different type of racism here, and it's true. Like having lived in the Carolinas, I feel like people were more overt about it. Where here, it's more covert. It's different, but it's everywhere. And I think that people do have like misconceptions about some of the blue states. Like people assume that Massachusetts, oh, you guys are this big progressive state. No. And I would have thought people would have realized that in the 2020 Democratic primary, because you notice the number of people that voted for Joe Biden versus who voted for Bernie and Warren, and where those areas were. Particularly people in the suburban areas supported Joe Biden heavily, whereas Bernie and Elizabeth Warren won more votes in the cities, right? So like in the Boston, Cambridge, Somerville area, that type of thing. But we're not progressive like people think we are. We've passed some progressive policies in reference to ballot measures, but I mean, they're Trump supporters here too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The
I think
generalization of different regions is can be frustrating. Sometimes it's accurate. But like I keep going back to Portland, they have a massive Nazi problem, way bigger than we have here in Texas. Like, well, we've seen there was one Nazi march that I saw in Austin, I think particularly because Austin is so progressive. They were just like, we're going to march in Austin. And they, just because that's what reactionaries do. But like, yeah, on a day-to-day basis, I'd run into fewer racists in Dallas, Texas than I think I would in Seattle.
that is interesting. I have not been to the Northwest, so I haven't been to Portland, Oregon, or Seattle. But I have heard from people, once you venture outside of those cities, Seattle and Portland, and you go to the other parts of the state, I've heard it's a completely different world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like anywhere. There's always a mix of people. And so I think rather than assuming that someone's going to be closed off to your ideas, it's worth a shot. That's what I've always found. And yeah, you'll run into some stereotypes here and there. If I see a dude in a cowboy hat with a big mustache, I know who I'm dealing with. But, if I see a person, normal 30 something, jeans and a t-shirt, odds are they'll be willing to listen at least.
Well, on that note, it has been reported multiple times that, particularly the past couple of months, that Joe Biden has lost tremendous support from the Latino community and the African American community. It's continuing to tank for him. What's strange, though, is that some people are choosing to go to Donald Trump, and some that I've spoken to just said they're not going to participate at all in the 2024 election. They don't like anybody that's running, or they don't trust any of the politicians, which I totally get that as well. But it's interesting to see some of those same people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 now pivoting towards Donald Trump. And the big things that I've heard from people is the economy, obviously, and also immigration. And I'm curious to hear, what is it like in Texas in reference to the immigration? Is it as crazy as Governor Abbott is saying that it is? And I ask because I do live in one of the areas where migrants have been sent in from Governor Abbott. I'm just curious, is it as big of an issue as Governor Abbott is saying it is?
It's tough because, yes, there is a lot of immigration into Texas because, we've got quite a large border. I'm about 8 hours from the border. So it's not immediately apparent to me the extent of it. I have spent some time down there doing some video work. And while I was there, I was there for a couple hours, I saw multiple people come across the border. They would just walk right across, go up to the border guards. Border guards would put them in the back of a truck and they'd drive off. And it's very strange to see, very surreal. And then it takes you down a rabbit hole thinking about, why do we have this in why don't we have free movement? Why can't we? There's got to be a better way to deal with this stuff. But I think the big problem is that we do have reactionary leadership within this border state. So they're going to try to blow it out of proportion. They're going to use it as a wedge issue, regardless of how big of a problem it is. We saw that happen with the migrant caravans thing that was a couple of years ago. They kept insisting there were these massive caravans of people from South America that had trekked thousands of miles to come to the United States. And you have to, at some point, kind of reject the notion that that's a problem, because if you claim to be pro-life, right? All these Republicans, and here come these people, say they have marched thousands of miles, risking their lives, their health, their loved ones, with kids in tow, to build a better life for themselves in this bastion of freedom that you believe in. Is that not an admirable thing to do? Would you not do the same thing in their situation? So I think the main issue we have is that it's only a problem because we choose not to enact policies that would make it less of a problem, right? We don't have the infrastructure to process people and put them on a path to citizenship or residency where they're not treated like second or third class citizens, where they're not just, bussed somewhere and dumped. That's the only reason it becomes a problem, because there's no infrastructure there to manage it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I was surprised to hear you say that you've seen them actually put them in the truck and then drive off. I mean, I've heard this from other people too, but they tend to be, Republicans. So I was just like,
Yeah,
is it just is that what's really happening, or is it feeding like their political, agenda, right?
it's
But
definitely
it
both. Yeah.
a little bit of both, yeah. And I also wonder too because how aware are people that you've spoken to in Texas about the foreign policies, like decisions that our government has made in those countries that are causing people to have to migrate? Like I think about the coup in Venezuela. Everybody keeps talking about they want Trump back because he'll be harder on immigration, and they're complaining about Venezuelans coming into the country, but they don't mention that Donald Trump actually,
Yeah.
initiated the coup in Venezuela under his presidency. Are they aware of part of this has to do with the foreign policy decisions that our country has made in those countries?
Yeah, most people know. Most people zero awareness whatsoever. Um, that's the issue when you have zero class consciousness. It's you have all these disconnected issues, and you can't trace them back to a systemic cause. Right? There's a reason people fled Cuba, and Miami has become a bastion of people who are, oh, they took my grandfather's business. Okay, what was your grandfather's business? Oh, he had an egg monopoly in Cuba. Okay, you see, so it's like if people would just realize that the economic base, the economic realities of our world have a material impact on all these other issues that seem unrelated, they could begin to understand why things are the way that they are a little bit better. And immigration is one of the clearest examples. With all the meddling we do abroad, if you do just the tiniest amount of digging, it becomes incredibly apparent what's actually going on, why people are leaving. And so even these rabid racists or xenophobes or whatever, if they were to actually want a solution to the problem, they should be advocating for us to stop destroying foreign nations with coups or extractive policies or election meddling or any number of other things that we do abroad. That's their solution. I mean, they just don't want to see it that way.
That's right. That's very well said. One more thing I have for you is I know there was another video that I saw of yours where you were talking about how people in the global south are exploited, and you
Mm-hmm.
made the connection to the social democracy. So some of those social programs that are in places like Denmark, and you were explaining like how they're able to do some of those programs that there may not be people in Denmark being exploited, but a lot of times the exploitation is happening to people in the global south. This is another thing that I feel like a lot of people that are social democrats or the Jacobin crowd, they don't really address this. And I think more people need to be aware that there is still some type of price to pay here. I think a lot of times people look around, and if they don't see the exploitation happening right in front of them, they don't realize that it still could be happening somewhere else.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind is the biggest thing for most people. It's people in the social democratic countries, the Nordic countries, they don't want socialism. They want capitalism with a smile, right? They want the worst excesses of capitalism blunted without risking their status, right? The thing that liberals want at the end of the day is change that does not endanger their comfort in any way. And that is something socialists recognize is not going to be possible if we're going to actually allow for the liberation and self-determination of people around the world, of oppressed peoples in the global south in particular. So yeah, and the only reason you see the social democratic countries the way they are, their people having been tossed some crumbs, is because on their doorstep they had this giant bear, the Soviet Union, for many years that tremendously improved the quality of life for their population. And then you had this capitalist project, like, if our project is so good, why aren't we keeping up with the overall caloric intake of the Soviet Union? Why aren't we keeping up with amount of art consumed per capita, things like that? And then when you look at it like that, you're like, okay, the further you get away from the Soviet Union, the less of those, or the fewer of those crumbs have been provided to the people. So it's very apparent how they got the way that they are, and those crumbs will be taken away at the earliest convenience of those in power in order to maintain the primacy of capital. That's just how it works. And in a place like the United States, where we were never given those crumbs, it's just that much easier to continue to degrade the quality of life of people who have never known what it means to even have the slightest social safety net.
Yeah, that's a good point. JT, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? Is that something you're interested in?
I do one with Hakeem and Ugopnik called The Deprogram. I don't feel like I'm interesting enough myself to do one alone. Believe it or not, I'm a very shy person, so I don't know that I could do it. But we have a lot of fun with The Deprogram. I think we've done, what have we done now? 127 episodes, I think now. So we've hit our stride, and we're really enjoying it.
Awesome. And before you go, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about starting a YouTube today and maybe entering the category that you're in, of video essays?
Oh boy. As much as it pains me to admit, aesthetics is almost everything. You take some time to make sure you have a good presentation, make sure your hair's did, get y'all a nice backdrop, that kind of thing. That's all that really matters. If you can present yourself in a way that makes people think that you are an authority figure, that you know what you're talking about, you have an infinitely higher chance of getting your ideas into receptive ears. You can be the most well-read person on earth. You can have read all the theory. You can understand how many yards of linen it takes to make a coat. But if you can't do a video without scaring away the average white suburban wine mom, you need to do a little bit more finagling of your presentation. I think presentation is key. I think that's something that a lot of people on the left don't spend enough time on.
This is true. This is very true. JT Chapman, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.